I'm your host, Effie Pilarinu, and I'm delighted today to have not one, two ladies, and on a topic that is very dear to my heart. It is all about females in finance and women in finance and so on. So before I say more, I'd like to introduce our guests today, Dr. Anette Broløs. Welcome, Anette.
Thank you so much.
And Dr. Erin Taylor. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, thank you very much for having us on.
Yeah, so you are both spearheading the research section of the European Women's Payment Network, and I'd like to ask you to talk about this network and understand. You are both PhDs. Anette has a PhD in innovation, if I understand correctly, and you are in anthropology. You are also an author. We'll have an opportunity to ask you a little bit about your background, each of you, and your journey in finance and banking and your interest in women. And I'd like also to understand a little bit more about the European Women's Payment Network. So let's start with each of you talking about your journey that has led you to where you are today in your focus.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I could tell a very long story, but I'll keep it brief. So my PhD was in anthropology, and I specialized in economic anthropology. For my PhD thesis, I lived in a very poor neighborhood in the Dominican Republic and looked at how people were investing in their housing to change their community, to change their lives. So that got me really hooked on that kind of a very basic idea of investment. In this case, it wasn't people investing with fintech, it was people buying literally the materials to build their houses. And after that, I was lucky enough to get involved in a project looking at a new mobile money service in Haiti. We were brought in to look at how people were adapting to the new service and how it was sort of jelly with existing financial practices. And that's what really got me hooked on the fintech side of things. That was in 2010, and I've been focusing on fintech ever since then. I've expanded out from Haiti and have looked more broadly doing projects in Portugal and the Netherlands and Brazil and Australia. So I've developed up a pretty good global picture of what's happening in different places.
Fantastic. And you, Anette?
Well, I'm trained as an economist, and I worked for a long time in the financial services sector in different capacities. I've been with associations, I've been with a regional bank, and I headed up what started Copenhagen FinTech, bringing the fintechs together in a new environment. And I always worked with development and innovation. I did my PhD on collaborative innovation, and that was the moment I realized that though there's a lot of research done on collaboration and on issues that should be very relevant for finance, financial services are not very well covered, neither as cases nor in surveys or anything. So I started sort of a journey to bring this more forward. Which is also when I met Erin.
Great. I forgot to mention that, of course, you are based in Europe since you're involved in the European Payments Network for women. And you, Anette, are in Copenhagen, and Erin is in The Hague. And I am in Switzerland, so we are in continental Europe. So let's tell me about this network. What is it about? When was it started, and what's its focus?
Well, the European Women's Payment Network, is a voluntary network created by women in payments who came together because they thought that there was important work to be done to further women's position in finance and particularly in payments. Martha McGinty Fisher is probably known by quite a lot of people, and she usually expresses that this is not an organization or a company. This is women being brought together in a tribe So this is where we meet to support each other and to take next steps further. And actually, there's a lot being done in that area. The European Women Payments Network works in many countries, work with young leaders, work with mentorships, and creates lots of events supported by their country ambassadors. It also works with male ambassadors, so it's not exclusively women, but still focused very much on women. And I think that at one of the earliest summits, I was asked to moderate a panel. I enjoyed the ambience there, and I talked to Martha about the need for doing research. And I think that's also where I met Erin, and we realized that not only is there a need for more research being done in finance, there's also very much a need for looking into financial services and the way they meet women's needs and or don't. So our first step was to create this research network in European Women Payments Network that bring together researchers from both industry and academia to share reports and results and to work together. But this was also the starting point of the reports that we have out now on female finance on the move, which we can come back to and talk more about at a later point.
Definitely. I mean, the reports that I saw before speaking to you today that you have published are very interesting. Let's ask the basic question about why we might need special, if you want, or dedicated financial services for women, and if we do, why is this different than the segmentation of, you know, Gen Z, Gen Y, all these other segmentations that are not only in vogue, but we have, you know, dedicated ventures to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really good questions, Effie. And there are many, many ways we could begin to answer them. But I suppose the first thing to point out is that offering financial services for women is not new. It goes back to as far as at least the 1880s with the Scottish Widows Fund offering life assurance to women. And of course, not a whole lot happened for the last few hundred years until maybe about 10 years ago or a little bit more. The current generation of financial service women are really preceded by the microfinance movement globally, which began roughly in the 1970s. So originally, microfinance began focusing on women with the recognition that women are often the ones who they need to make money to feed their families, but they're also the main breadwinner for their families in many places around the world. And that investing in women is good business because they will tend to not only look after themselves, but also their families overall. They're also very good at repaying loans. So that idea that financial services could be catered to women specifically comes from the idea that women have very particular roles in the sense that they are so often the people who manage the family, and especially the people who manage the daily family budget. And so in recent years, we've seen those services expand, especially in the United States and in Europe and Australia, to offer a different kind of financial service to women, this time covering a much broader remit, including investments and payments and buy now, pay later services and a whole bunch of stuff that didn't exist before. Now, it's interesting because you could make the argument that, well, women in wealthier countries don't need their own financial services. After all, money is fungible. You would think that financial services would work better if everybody had access to them. But coming back to your point about differences in segmentation, what we're seeing is there is a trend towards creating these niche financial services for different groups. So you do have, financial services for Gen X, or financial services for the elderly, or perhaps financial services for refugees. And one of the groups emerging in there is financial services for women. And a great example of why it might be useful to design a financial service for women is in the area of investments, because investments is an area in which women have historically been disadvantaged. Female children tend to receive less education about investment than male children do. So when women grow up and become adults and want to start investing, they feel like they lack information. But one thing we found in our recent research on Switzerland is that even women who have plenty of experience investing, know what they're doing, they still don't feel very confident making decisions, and they still feel like they need extra support. So for some reason, women feel like they're behind the 8 ball, even if they're not. And so having financial services specifically for women can help women to get more tailored service, maybe feel a little less silly if they're talking to women, if they're getting opportunities to network with other women investing, for example. So basically, there are many ways in which you can design features into financial services that help women feel comfortable, help them access information, and also help them talk to their peers, because women tend to very much like advice from their peers. They trust their peers a lot as well when they're making decisions.
So in a way, combining a social network type of capability or a digital community, a community capability with financial services is something that is more desirable, if you want, for women, or facilitates women, makes it easier for women. It's not only transactional, from what I understand from what you're saying.
Exactly. So the thing that sets financial services for women apart is 2 things. One is that women do tend to have that social role as carers for the family, both the immediate family, extended family. And the other one is that women do tend to prefer to take advice from a social network more so than from formal advisors in many cases. And so building financial services that draw upon those social capabilities of women means that women can get better service and they can get information that they trust.
Very interesting. I mean, I was going to ask you both, what are the different ways that women are underrepresented in the financial services industry? I mean, we know from many stats as employees. You mentioned now from the investment angle as investors that women, even in very educated or professional environments, they invest less. What are other ways in which women are underrepresented or are not as present or active in the financial services industry?
I think there are many ways where women are overlooked. So one point to make before going into the specific areas could be that having worked in finance, I know so well that what often happens when you work with innovation and new products and services to offer to all of your customers, there's a focus on what the technology will allow you to do next. And also, many of the developers actually working in the banks developing products are men. So I think that very often women are overlooked, and yet women are part of making about 90% of all household decisions on economic, all kinds of economic decisions, even including investment. And what an organization like Financial Alliance for Women find is that about 75% of women who have an active relationship with a bank are not satisfied with the service that they get. So that would be one way where women are overlooked in financial services. They're just not seen as the customers. And probably part of it because of the organization. So there's a connection between the internal structures in the bank and the external servicing of the customers. And what we know, I think it's generally known for everybody that when you look at financial services company, there are many women at the starting level, so at the entry level, and many women employees to start. As they go along and as they learn and progress in their careers, there are fewer and fewer women. So often it's told, we're told that that's because women prefer their families, they prioritize their children, and they don't want to take the long hours that they need to take to be a leader in an organization. We also see that many of the women actually employed in leading positions in banks and other financial companies are in specific services like marketing, like HR, like compliance, rather than being in IT, rather than being in development of services. And we have been doing some interviews in another and completely different project with women, and one of them said to us, well, in this bank, we actually need leaders who are able to serve our corporate customers. So it's very important that all our leaders have a background servicing corporate customers. And we see that many of our women employees prefer to do retail services. So that's just to show you one example of why women don't progress in their positions. Either the male leaders who are already in place think they're not capable of it, which is what we often see in the EWPN. It should be so now, but it still is. Or they are put in more caring like positions, or they don't have the possibility to progress.
Or they suffer from this stereotype that gets propagated that women have more affinity to retail than corporate business, and then of course it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
But this also means that often it comes back to the companies in that they're not able to serve professional women, like Erin said just a little while ago, that the professional women who come to the banks are not satisfied with the services they get either. They're not seen whether they represent a big organization as the CFO, or whether they come as women leaders in a new startup, that they're having difficulties getting heard and getting their jobs. A good example is in the startup companies, where we know that women who go to interviews to present or to pitch their companies, they are asked about what they already achieved and how they're going to manage the risks, while males are asked how they have what kind of potential they have to perform. So even the whole environment is biased towards women. So it's in many different spheres that women do not hold the positions that they could have in finance.
Yeah. Erin, you mentioned microfinance and how women are much more involved in borrowing, through microfinance platforms to grow their economic activity, to be able to support their families, and so on. On the other hand, my impression is, and I'm sure your research can speak to this, aren't women under-borrowed? Meaning that we women, I don't know, have a fear of borrowing. I don't know what it is. It's related to our values or whatever. Are there figures or evidence from your research that support that? And is that an issue not only in emerging markets, but in any economy where small businesses, entrepreneurs are the core of the economy?
Yeah, I think it's an issue everywhere. The thing with microfinance is, although microfinance was initially designed around women's needs and contexts, over the years it's become more marketed to a general population and not so much women. So now you see fewer microfinance programs targeted at women specifically. And if you look at what these programs are doing, what you tend to find is often women might be 80% of the customers in terms of the number of loans, but often men still end up borrowing more money. Most of the money goes to men because women tend to take the smaller loans. So although the services are there, women don't necessarily access them equally, even if they take them up in greater numbers. And I think Annette has some figures on the context more broadly, don't you, Annette?
Well, I can say that we didn't go specifically into the loan section in our research. We were sort of concerned with understanding why there would be this surge in organizations providing services broadly for women. So we didn't go into any specific sectors, but an organization like Financial Alliance for Women find that actually women are 20% less likely than men to have borrowed from formal channels. And that's sort of across the world, including, of course, microfinance. That would support what you ask, Ify. But I think there's an interesting, and I could say that is contrary to what actually happens when you look at women having loaned money, that they're 60% more likely to save than men. And they also have a lower rate of underperforming loan than men do. So they're actually quite good customers, and companies should realize that the better they serve them, the better they'd actually, the better results they'd actually have. But I think there's a question of how to understand the concept of risk, probably, because what we might say is that women are more risk averse, so they're less likely to borrow money than male. But also we see a similar result in investment, that many people say, well, women are more risk averse than males, and that's why they have lower results and lower investments. But if you go into a broader description of investments, you will actually probably see that women are risk aware. So they're very aware of what kind of risk they're running. They don't want to bet their money. They want to invest their money towards a goal. They want to achieve building their own company. They want to invest, to build a family, to get the house, to get an education for their children. And so if you put it like that, women are perhaps sometimes more risk loving than men are. They will quit their job to take the next step in their lives. But that's a different kind of investment, and it gets overlooked by the way that you often do the math in financial economics.
Very interesting. I mean, I'm thinking, hearing from both of you, the concepts that Paolo Cironi discusses in his books, where it's all about, goals, setting goals, and financial services being the risk manager and the advisor in those outcomes. And there I see that, versus the product and transactional approach with which I guess men are much more comfortable than women. And women actually are taking bigger risks, as you said, Anette, from a life perspective, right? Because we are undertaking all these major responsibilities around a family and children plus work. It's a very interesting perspective that goes contrary to what exists. I mean, we spoke about investments, we spoke about loans. What other subsectors in finance are important in terms of catering to women, creating products specifically for women? And maybe if there are areas that you could say that have done better to serve women, or really lag, like, is there a spectrum that you could share with us?
Absolutely. There's definitely a spectrum. Besides investment, which is probably the biggest, which we've discussed, we do see a fair few financial management apps around targeted women. And those are particularly great tools for women to use because they tend to focus more on goals from a social perspective rather than the numerical perspective. So an app like Navit might show women not so much focus on the figures of how much money they've saved or how they're managing the actual numbers, but focus on social goals in terms of what women are trying to achieve. Dreams is another one, which is not specifically focused on women per se, but which incorporates some really great behavioral features to appeal to women. So for example, if you want to set a savings goal for something, you can put like a picture of what it represents and have that picture help prompt you as to why you want to reach that goal. And the numbers are sort of less importance. It's not because women can't cope with numbers. It's just because women tend to be so social that it's easier to recognize, so you have a picture of your daughter because you're saving for your daughter's education. That is actually more compelling than looking at a number of you've saved, $10,562, just appealing to that social side, that human side. What else can we say? Well, there are actually quite a lot happening in insurance, especially in terms of car insurance and health insurance for women. There have been quite a few companies offering women car insurance on the basis that women tend to have fewer accidents, but they might have a greater need for support after they've been involved in an accident. They may also want advice on things like finding family-friendly mechanics who know things like how to fit a baby seat to a car, this sort of thing. So it might sound a little stereotypical, but it has actually been quite popular, particularly in the UK. And elsewhere, particularly in Southeast Asia, but also other places, we're seeing health insurance emerge for women as well that's specifically tailored to them. And that makes a lot of sense, of course, because women give birth, women have particular kinds of gynecological needs, issues with breast cancer and so on. So there are very concrete reasons why women might want their own health insurance. Apart from that, what's lagging? Well, we don't see anything much in the area of payments. Apart from in buy now, pay later services, there aren't so much, it's not so much that there are buy now, pay later services that are only for women, but they tend to market themselves to women a lot because women often have this role as being the shopper for the family.
Shopper, yeah.
There are fewer in payments, probably for obvious reasons. It's not, you know, it's not so useful for women to have a payment service that is so specific because payments is such a generic kind of a transaction. I would say that the sector that's lagging the most is probably capital investment for businesses. So there tends to be far less capital invested in businesses. So going back to your point about borrowing, that is probably the area in which women are served the least.
So whether it's for SMEs or funding for startups,
Exactly. Venture capital, all that sort of stuff. It's definitely serves women far less than it serves men.
And in terms of geographies, geographic regions, are there regions that are more ahead in terms of focusing on women?
Yes. So in our second report, Female Finance in Figures, we looked very much into the companies providing these services around the world. And we found that the market developed the fastest and the earliest in the United States, closely followed by Europe and Australia. So we see the most activity generally in those places. Apart from microfinance, there's really very little ventures happening in the African continent or in Latin America, but we are starting to see an uptick in financial services for women in Asia, across Asia, especially in terms of health insurance and things like banking products for women.
You know, the other question that I have is, are these ventures that you see, and you already mentioned some specific examples and names, are they new standalone ventures, or are you seeing also, you know, existing financial services providers adding services specifically for women, whether it is, you know, I don't know, a Barclays Bank, an HSBC or whatever, versus the standalone specific?
We actually found both when we looked for services, both from existing companies creating either networks or smaller communities served by women employees, or specific programs, particularly in Africa and Asia, where they would reach out to women particularly in agriculture, for instance. So we saw some existing companies actually offering programs, but most of them were fintech startups seeing a possibility in an area and starting a company, which also means that it's quite interesting to have a look at whether they're doing better for providing services for men or for women and being more diverse in a company. And we helped Findexable build their diversity index, doing some of their interviews a year back. And it was quite interesting because I think some people would expect that these new organizations surely would have a different perspective on serving women, both as employees and as customers. And sadly, they found that they're not doing very well. They are
in terms of
doing.
their employee composition.
Exactly, they're doing sort of actually as bad as everybody else in financial services, and that is very interestingly, some of the countries where they're doing better is Latin America and Asia. So Europe and the US are not even spearheading this area, which is quite interesting.
Very interesting. So if you were to sort of give some advice or insights to financial services providers, existing financial service providers, how to look at this issue, how to think about this big issue going forward, where to start thinking or addressing it, what would you be able to say? I know this is a broad question, but it's an important question.
There's so much that one could say that is very explicit and concrete, and yet I would be tempted to say that the first thing is to recognize that no organization, unless it's really focused on a niche area or a niche group of customers, can afford to lose half the market. So that's sort of one thing to let sink in. And the next thing is to take this agenda seriously, because so much of it is based on the biases that are ingrained in many of us, and that we don't even see them in everyday life. So take this agenda seriously and try to work with it from a personal perspective, and to, like McKinsey said in an article just today, I saw, you need not to create only just metrics and goals. You also need to teach your employees the capabilities, to help give them the capabilities to help do this, because it's not as easy as it looks. But get started, get out there and start looking at what's in there. That would be the first thing, I think.
And obviously, this is not about technology. This is about personalization, understanding values, understanding the right customer experience, and so on. Is this the type of work that you're doing, Erin, through Anthropology? Can you tell us a little bit about its mission?
Absolutely, thank you. I think I forgot to mention the business at the beginning of our talk, so nice to play some catch up. So Anthropology is a research company specializing in understanding people's financial behavior. So that could be women, it could be people living in certain countries, so on and so forth. So we go out to the places where people live and the places where people work, and we talk to them on location often by interviews, using a method called the Portable Kit Study, where we ask them to show us the contents of their bags and wallets to get a sense of how they manage their financial lives. And we use other qualitative and quantitative methods to try to understand all kinds of issues regarding people's financial behavior, especially around issues of adoption and avoidance. So what are people happy to use? What do people avoid using? And thinking about what is really driving people's behavior, as opposed to trying to focus on what we think we want them to do. So it's only really when you try to understand people's logic of how they manage their daily life that you can start thinking about what kinds of solutions might work for them, as opposed to simply creating a solution, thinking it's fabulous and assuming that everyone will use it because it's fabulous. So a great example of this is that we did some research in Brazil, and we found that the lower income people we interviewed used an enormous range of financial products. They would often have 3 or more bank accounts. They would use any new payments platform or payments tool that came along. They were very, very savvy about the costs of things like financial transactions, and they would manage their finances and their financial and the tools in a way that would benefit them the most. The interesting thing is that this is a group that would probably be seen to be not that financially literate, in terms of not having an extensive knowledge about, let's say, investments or something like that. But in fact, they had exactly the knowledge they needed to manage their own financial lives. And I think my lesson that came out of all of that, and in fact, all the research I've done, is that people are usually the experts in their own financial lives. You know, they use tools that work for them and they know what they're doing. It may be the case there are more tools they don't know about or more skills that they can learn, but it's really important to trust people and just have faith that they are doing what's right for them as the starting point of any research. And that's what we try to do in Anthropology, is begin with the person and then look at what their needs are.
Fantastic. So this type of approach, if you want, is valuable not only for financial services, but obviously for e-commerce and commerce and so on. Anybody that's involved in trade, basically, and therefore, payments and the economic activity.
Absolutely. And I would just add to that what makes economic and financial research special is that while people are engaging in pretty logical and rational behaviors, they often don't talk about it very much. So they often aren't accustomed to describing to you how they manage their finances. And so it does take some sort of insider knowledge and experience to know what questions to ask them and how to get people talking about things that they subconsciously understand perfectly, but haven't articulated often to anybody before.
And
Great.
there's no doubt that this will become more and more important as we see embedded financial services being more developed. So payments is about the first thing that gets embedded in the whole commerce and e-commerce situation. And that's why it's so important to understand how the consumer is actually deciding.
I mean, we're all talking now about customized experiences at the point of sale, customized payment experiences of all types. And at the first level, we think it's about, okay, a credit card or another way, a QR code or a wallet and so on. But here we're talking behind the scenes, really, to understand the behavior of the customer. There's no doubt about that. Ladies, tell our audience where they can reach out to you. And I know some of your reports, your research are already on the European Women's Payment Network. Share with us where they can contact you, LinkedIn, and any plans that we should be aware of going forward.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Yes, the 3 reports on female finance are all on the EWPN website, so that's easy enough to find. Apart from that, you can come and look at our website, anthropology.com, where we have a whole lot of blog posts on more general issues and specific issues, as well as the research we've done.
Great.
And for any questions in personal contacts and ideas for other ways of spreading the word, would be probably to reach out to us also on LinkedIn, which is an easy way to create contact. And we'd be happy to do the research that we did in Switzerland in any other country that might be interested. Great.
I mean, I was quite surprised with the research with the research results from Switzerland, and I must say that I really loved your approach with the handbags. Looking into the handbags and seeing what is in there, and from there deciphering what's going on. I think handbags for us women tell the story of our lives, and often it's a story that we don't talk about, but it is there, and we are very much connected to it. So I love that, and I hope we can show some of those images that are found in your reports. Thank you so much, both Anette and Erin.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity.